There is a particular kind of anger that does not arrive like a storm. It sits quietly in the body. It hides behind politeness, behind patience, behind the smile you give when someone asks if you are okay, and you say yes even though your chest feels tight and your jaw has been clenched for hours. It lives in the moment you put the phone face down and still keep checking it with your mind. It lives in the way you forgive too quickly, explain too much, absorb too much, and then go home feeling strangely empty, as if something in you has been used up without anyone ever touching it. That anger is often invisible to other people. Sometimes it is invisible to you too. You may call yourself calm. You may even believe you are calm, but there is a difference between peace and suppression. One feels spacious. The other feels like holding your breath so long that your whole nervous system starts to believe silence is survival. And this is where Carl Jung becomes important, because what many empaths call being nice, being understanding, or being the bigger person can sometimes be a persona, a mask, a social identity built so carefully that it begins to hide the truth even from the person wearing it. The truth is that the empath often has a shadow, not because empathy is fake, not because kindness is a lie, but because any quality we over-identify with eventually casts its opposite into darkness. If you have spent years being the one who listens, the one who softens the room, the one who keeps the peace, then your anger does not disappear. It goes underground. It becomes the part of you that you do not want to admit exists. And what goes underground does not die. It waits. It waits in your shoulders when you tense up around certain people. It waits in the sudden exhaustion after a conversation that should have been simple. It waits in the resentment you feel and immediately judge. It waits in the thought you never say out loud. Why is it always me who has to understand? That is the hidden anger. Not explosive rage, not cruelty, not violence. Something more painful than that. The anger of a person who has been too available for too long. Sometimes the empath does not realize how much anger is inside them until the day they stop giving, and then the whole world seems to notice the change before they do. People call it cold, distant, different. They say, "What happened to you?" As if the real question is not what happened to them, but what happened to the arrangement that used to work so well for everyone else. Because when you were overgiving, the system was stable. Everyone could lean. Everyone could take. Everyone could feel relieved in your presence. But the moment you begin to pull your energy back, the room changes. And then you see something uncomfortable. You see that some people did not love your kindness. They depended on its lack of boundaries. But this is only the surface. The deeper truth is that hidden anger in the empath is not just a reaction to other people. It is often a reaction to a split inside the self. Jung would call this the shadow, the part of the personality that the ego refuses to identify with, the part that carries what the conscious self wants to reject. If your conscious identity says, "I am gentle, I am forgiving, I am safe," then your shadow may carry the words, "I am furious, I am tired, I am done." And the more you deny that shadow, the more it leaks out in sideways ways. You become passive-aggressive without meaning to. You withdraw without explaining why. You cry and then apologize for crying. You feel guilty for needing rest. You resent people who ask for more, and then you resent yourself for resenting them. The anger never gets a clean voice, so it becomes atmosphere. That atmosphere is exhausting. You can feel it in the body before you can name it. A heavy stomach, a shallow breath, a tiredness that sleep does not fully fix, a strange pressure behind the eyes when someone texts you again with another problem, another crisis, another need. You read the message and your first impulse is not compassion, it is dread. And then you judge yourself for that dread. That is where the real conflict begins, because the empath often believes anger makes them bad. They were taught, directly or indirectly, that being loving means being endlessly accessible. They learn to associate anger with danger, rejection, selfishness, or shame. So they built a persona around being the one who never erupts, never demands, never makes things difficult. But a persona is not the same as a self. A persona is a social adaptation. It helps you survive. It helps you belong. It helps you manage the world. But if you live only through the persona, you eventually become estranged from your own inner life. You start performing goodness instead of living wholeness. And that is when hidden anger becomes dangerous. Not because anger itself is dangerous, but because it has been abandoned. Unclaimed anger becomes distorted. It can turn inward as self-blame. It can turn into fatigue, numbness, anxiety, or sudden tears. It can turn outward in a way that surprises you. One day, you answer a simple question too sharply, and even you are startled by the edge in your voice. Another day, you look at someone you once tried to save and feel nothing but a cold, lucid distance. People often fear that moment. They think, "I'm becoming heartless." But sometimes what they are becoming is honest. And honesty can feel like coldness to people who benefited from your confusion. There is a reason this pattern is so common in empath and manipulative dynamics. The empath shadow often contains exactly what the manipulative pattern knows how to exploit: guilt, self-doubt, rescue instinct, the need to be good, the fear of being seen as selfish. When someone pushes on those weak points, the empath's conscious mind tries to stay loving, while the unconscious starts screaming. That scream may not sound like words. It may sound like a body that no longer wants to answer the phone, a mind that keeps replaying the same conversation, a heart that feels both loyal and trapped, a sudden urge to disappear, to sit in the car a few extra minutes before walking inside, to be alone in a room where nobody needs anything from you. This is not weakness. This is the psyche trying to restore balance. Carl Jung understood something that many people miss. The unconscious does not only speak through dreams and symbols, it speaks through symptoms, patterns, and repeated emotional collisions. When the same kind of person drains you, when the same kind of conversation leaves you hollow, when the same kind of guilt keeps you available long after your body has said no, the unconscious is not just repeating pain. It is trying to show you where your consciousness has become one-sided. If you have built your identity around being the one who absorbs, then your shadow may carry the capacity to refuse. If you have built your identity around understanding everyone, then your shadow may carry the right to misunderstand them and still walk away. If you have built your identity around being kind, then your shadow may carry the fierce, protective anger that says, "enough." And that word, enough, is often the first real boundary. Not a dramatic speech, not a revenge plan, not a performance of strength. Just enough. Enough of the repeated apology that changes nothing. Enough of the emotional labor that is never returned. Enough of the conversations where your pain gets translated into someone else's discomfort and then disappears. Enough of the role where you are expected to remain soft, even when your insides are bruised. The hidden anger of the empath often begins to surface when they realize they have been confusing empathy with self-erasure. That confusion is old. It usually did not begin with the manipulative person, or the difficult friend, or the family member who always took too much. It began earlier, in a deeper pattern. Maybe you learned that love was earned by being useful. Maybe you became the peacekeeper in a chaotic home. Maybe your sensitivity made you the one who noticed moods before anyone else did, so you became the translator of other people's pain before you learned to translate your own. That creates a complex. A complex is not just a memory. It is an emotionally charged pattern that gathers around an early wound and keeps activating in the present. When the empathy complex is activated, the person does not simply respond to what is happening now. They respond to what is being awakened in them. The past enters the room without knocking. That is why a small tone of voice can feel huge, why a delayed reply can feel like abandonment, why a dismissive comment can land like a childhood verdict, why the body reacts as if the stakes are life and death, even when the mind says, "This is not that serious." The mind may know. The complex does not care. It pulls the old feeling into the present and says, "This is familiar. This is how we survive." And if your survival strategy was to keep others calm, then your anger had to be hidden. Not because you lacked it, but because you learned that your anger threatened connection. So you became the one who swallowed the reaction, softened the edge, and carried the emotional weather for everyone else. But the cost of that strategy is high. Eventually, the body keeps the account even when the mind does not. That is when the resentment appears. Resentment is often misunderstood. People think it means you are bitter, petty, or ungrateful. Sometimes it does. But often resentment is simply the psyche's record of repeated self-betrayal. It is the feeling that says, "I have gone beyond what was healthy for me, and I did it so many times that now I don't know how to stop." That is why hidden anger in the empath can feel so shameful. It is not only anger toward others, it is anger toward the self for staying too long, explaining too much, hoping too hard, and ignoring the quiet signal that said, "This is costing you more than you admit." Here is the part most people avoid. The The empath is not always innocent in the dynamic, even when they are the one being harmed. Not in the sense of blame, in the sense of participation. When you are unconsciously attached to being needed, you may keep choosing people who need you in ways that are never truly nourishing. When you are unconsciously loyal to the role of rescuer, you may mistake chaos for intimacy. When your persona is built around being the good one, you may tolerate too much because conflict threatens the image you have of yourself. That is where projection enters. Projection is when we place our inner material onto another person. Sometimes the empath projects goodness onto someone who is not actually safe. Sometimes they project the hope that if they understand enough, love enough, stay enough, the other person will finally become what they need. Sometimes they project the fantasy that their patience will heal the pattern. But the pattern is not healed by patience alone. It is made conscious by truth. And the truth is often painful. Some people are not asking to be understood. They are asking to be managed, absorbed, forgiven, and endlessly re-entered after every injury. They may not even know they are doing it. That is part of the tragedy. But whether conscious or not, the effect on you is real. Your hidden anger is the part of you that knows the effect is real. It knows that your presence has become a place where other people dump what they do not want to feel. It knows that your compassion has been mistaken for consent. It knows that every time you say, "It's fine," when it is not fine, something inside you leaves a little more. And then one day you stop answering so quickly. You do not announce it. You do not explain it. You simply take longer. You become less available. You let the silence stretch. And that silence can feel terrifying at first, because if you have lived as the emotional bridge for too long, then stepping back feels like the bridge collapsing. Guilt rushes in. Doubt rushes in. You hear the old voice. Maybe I'm being harsh. Maybe I'm overreacting. Maybe I should be more understanding. But the new question is better. Not, am I being kind? The better question is, am I being honest with my body? Because the body knows when a boundary is needed before the mind is willing to admit it. The body knows when your smile has become a mask. It knows when your yes is actually fear. It knows when your empathy is no longer an open heart, but a locked room with no exit. It knows when you are trying to save a dynamic that only survives because you keep sacrificing yourself inside it. And this is where the shadow becomes a teacher. The shadow is not trying to make you cruel. It is trying to make you whole. It says, you are allowed to be angry. It says, you are allowed to dislike being used. It says, you are allowed to notice who only loves your usefulness. It says, you are allowed to stop performing softness for people who have not earned your trust. That does not mean you become cold in the petty sense. It means you become clear. There is a difference. Coldness is often a wound closing too tightly. Clarity is a wound finally being protected. Coldness seeks to punish. Clarity seeks to preserve life. Coldness says, I will withhold so you suffer. Clarity says, I will no longer hand you the parts of me that you have not shown you can hold with care. That distinction matters, because the goal is not to become someone who never feels. The goal is to stop living as if your feelings exist only to serve other people. When the empath begins to integrate the shadow, the anger does not vanish. It becomes useful. It becomes information. It tells you where the line is. It tells you where your generosity has turned into a leak. It tells you where your nervous system has been trying to protect you all along. And yes, sometimes that protection looks like distance. Sometimes it looks like a delayed reply that is not a game, but a pause. Sometimes it looks like ending a conversation instead of finishing it. Sometimes it looks like not explaining yourself for the 10th time to someone who has already made up their mind. Sometimes it looks like letting the room go quiet and refusing to fill the silence just because you can feel another person getting uncomfortable. That discomfort is not your responsibility. This is where many empaths begin to change, and this is also where guilt appears. Guilt can be a compass, but it can also be conditioning. If you were trained to believe your worth depends on how much you can tolerate, then guilt will show up every time you choose yourself. It will whisper that your boundary is cruelty. It will tell you that your exhaustion is inconvenient. It will frame your self-respect as selfishness. But guilt is not always truth. Sometimes, guilt is simply the sound of an old role losing access. That is why the first boundary often feels emotionally wrong, even when it is psychologically right. Your system is not used to it. The persona that kept everyone comfortable resists. The complex that equated love with sacrifice panics. The shadow, meanwhile, stands there with crossed arms, saying, "Finally." If this names something you have never been able to say out loud, write a single sentence for yourself in the comments. Not for anyone else. Just one sentence that tells the truth you have been carrying in silence. Because naming the pattern is not a small thing. It is the beginning of individuation. Individuation is the process of becoming more fully yourself. Not more pleasing, not more compliant, not more acceptable. More whole, more honest, more centered. It means you stop living entirely through the expectations of the outer world and begin to listen to the deeper order inside you. For the empath, individuation often begins with a painful realization. Being the good one is not the same as being the true one. The good one never causes trouble. The true one notices trouble and responds to it. The good one keeps the peace. The true one asks whether the peace is real or just silence built on self-abandonment. The good one absorbs. The true one differentiates. And differentiation is not betrayal, it is maturity. This is why hidden anger matters so much. Without it, the empath remains porous. With it, the empath becomes discerning. Anger, when integrated, is not a destroyer of love. It is a guardian of value. It says, "I can care about you and still not let you cross this line." It says, "I can understand your pain and still refuse to become the container for your unresolved chaos." That is a hard lesson for the heart that wanted everyone to be okay. But the heart is not meant to be a landfill. It is meant to be a living center. And a living center has boundaries. The more you respect that, the less the hidden anger has to erupt. The less it has to become bitterness. The less it has to turn into that exhausted, flat feeling where you no longer trust your own tenderness because it has been overused. The real healing move is not to kill your anger. It is to listen to it before it has to shout. What is it protecting? What is it refusing? What is it tired of carrying? Where have you mistaken endurance for love? Where have you been loyal to a pattern that only survives because you keep feeding it? Those questions are not comfortable. They are not meant to be. They are meant to return you to yourself. And once you begin to do that, something subtle happens. The people who benefited from your unconsciousness may not like the new you. They may call you distant, difficult, changed, cold, self-centered, or not like before. Let them. Their disappointment is not proof that you are wrong. Sometimes your clarity will disappoint people who were thriving in your confusion. That is not cruelty, that is consequence. The empath who integrates the shadow does not become less loving. They become less available to emotional theft. They stop confusing intensity with intimacy. They stop calling every draining connection a soul lesson. They stop treating exhaustion as evidence of loyalty. And the hidden anger, the one that once felt dangerous, becomes a quiet strength. Not a weapon, a backbone. Not a performance, a presence. You begin to notice the difference between compassion and compulsion. You can feel someone's pain without volunteering your nervous system as the place where they store it. You can care without carrying. You can listen without disappearing. You can say no without needing to make the other person comfortable with it. That is a profound shift. Because the moment you stop abandoning yourself, your anger no longer needs to protect you so violently. It can soften into discernment. It can become the inner voice that says, "This is not mine," or "This is too much," or "I am not available for this pattern anymore." And that sentence, spoken honestly, changes everything. Not because it controls the other person, because it returns your energy to its rightful owner. The body feels that return before the mind does. The shoulders drop a little, the jaw loosens, the stomach is less braced. There is more room in the breath. The room you are in starts to feel like your room again, not a station where everyone else's emotional baggage gets sorted. This is how the shadow serves the empath. It gives you back the anger that was never meant to be violence. It gives you back the right to be a person, not a sanctuary with no door. It gives you back the ability to distinguish between love and leakage. And if you are in the middle of this now, if you feel the guilt and the relief at the same time, if part of you still wants to explain while another part of you wants to disappear, remember this. The conflict itself is not proof that you are doing it wrong. It is proof that a deeper self is emerging. The old role is dying slowly. That is why it feels awkward. That is why you may feel mean when you are finally honest. That is why saying less can feel like a loss at first. But you are not losing your heart. You are losing the habit of handing it away. There is a difference, a crucial one, because the heart that never protects itself eventually becomes numb. The heart that learns boundaries becomes reliable. It can love without collapsing. It can feel without drowning. It can stay open without becoming available for endless extraction. That is the mature empath. Not the one who feels everything for everyone. The one who feels deeply and still knows where the self ends and the other begins. And that is the real shadow work here. Not becoming less sensitive, becoming more truthful with sensitivity. Not becoming harder, becoming clearer. Not becoming colder out of spite, becoming calm enough to stop betraying yourself. So if the hidden anger has been rising in you, maybe it is not a sign that you are becoming someone unloving. Maybe it is the first honest signal that your psyche is done participating in a role that costs too much. Maybe it is the beginning of your boundary. Maybe it is the beginning of your peace. And maybe, just maybe, the part of you that once said yes to everything is finally ready to say yes to yourself. My kindness no longer requires self-betrayal. Let that be enough for today. Let that sentence sit in the room with you like a closed door that does not need to slam, because it was opened with care and closed with dignity. You do not need to prove your goodness by staying available to what drains you. You do not need to earn rest by collapsing first. You do not need to keep translating other people's behavior into something kinder than it is. You only need to tell the truth, quietly and firmly, until your nervous system believes you. That is how the shadow helps. That is how the empath comes home to themselves. Not by becoming less human, by finally becoming whole.